Today's video is about how to research your book if you're writing historical fiction, and I'm going to give you my secret tip for doing that, and stick around because you may be surprised to learn it involves two women in the same bed. So here we go with how to write historical fiction, starting with your research. We're going to look at the questions that people usually ask me about research because I think that might be helpful. One of the first ones people ask is, how long does it take to do your research? And really that's a difficult question to answer because obviously it's going to vary with each book. Be careful that you don't spend so much time researching that you don't actually get to do any writing, or that you're putting it off. Start with your research, make your notes, proceed in a way that you think is going to get you to feel confident talking about the time in which your book is set. Now, you're never going to become an expert. Obviously, there are historians who write fiction, and there are writers of historical fiction who become experts because they stick with one time and they tend to be really enthusiastic and really knowledgeable about that time. That might be you, that might be your goal. I have to say it's not how I do it. I'm easily bored and very curious, so I tend to want to change the era that I'm writing in or look at different aspects of the same time period, and so that takes me into different areas of research, and it wouldn't be possible to become an expert on all of those. So I get very enthusiastic about the thing I'm researching for a particular book, and I really do go into that in some detail, but I would never claim to be an expert. You don't want to start writing and think, I can't really picture the house that they're in, or I'm not sure what clothes they'd be wearing. You want to get your basics sorted out. You also need to have some background of the political and social happenings of the time. It's no good pitching in if you don't know which king was on the throne, or whether it was a republic, or whether there was a plague that year, or a drought, or all those sort of significant things that are going to affect the characters in your story and the plot of your story. But you'll get an idea. So as to how long, when you feel you're ready to start, pitch in. Because the other thing is that you never actually finish doing the research. So you're going to continue to research as you write. Again, be wary of that holding you up. It's easy to do that thing of procrastinating, and if you go to my video on the best and worst bits about writing and good habits and bad habits, those two will point you in the direction of how to avoid using research as something that holds up your writing rather than makes it go forwards. So be wary of that, but be prepared for the fact that you will need to research as you go along. You can't possibly get everything you need to know at the start. Okay. Another thing people ask me about is sources. Now, as historians will tell you, there are primary and secondary sources for historical research, which means that a secondary source is something that somebody has already written about history. So it will be a book written, say, last year, about perhaps the 17th century. That is someone else's historical study that has yielded a wonderful resource for you, and they're very valid and you will use those a lot. But a primary source is something that existed from that time, and it might not be a book, it might be an object, it could be an item of clothing, it could be a piece of furniture. Those primary sources are really powerful things to use. I don't know if you can hear the tractor going past the window, but you know, it just goes to show even in the countryside there are distracting noises, so we'll just ignore the tractor as it rattles past my shed. So, primary sources. I have an example to show you of a primary source that I used when I was writing The Midnight Witch, which is set in 1913 in London, and this is a copy of the London Illustrated News. It's actually a collection. It's a special Silver Jubilee record number. So it's not just the normal newspaper or magazine that used to come out. The London Illustrated News was a very popular and a very useful thing for a writer or a historian to look at. But this was a Silver Jubilee collection, and I got this on eBay. It wasn't expensive. It was, I don't know, £10–15. Well, you know, that's cheaper than a trip to the British Museum or something like that, so it's not an expensive item. I thoroughly recommend things like that. I'm just going to give you a little look. So it's full of photographs. Now this may be a reproduction or it may be the original, it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that this is the source material that gives us the best access to what was going on at the time. It's all about the coronation, and the tractor's going past again. You see it going past the window, it's getting closer. They're liming the fields, so we've had to have all the windows shut. I've got flowers in here, which is lovely, but they're making me sneeze, and I can't open the window because if I open the window, clouds of lime will come through and we'll have a sort of very bizarre dusty effect, so sorry about that. Anyway, the London Illustrated News. So these sort of things are brilliant. They have newspaper cuttings of the day. They have lots of, let me show you this maybe, lots of photographs. They'll give you an idea of things that were for sale. The advertisements are brilliant. There will be short stories in them, all those sort of things. And these are the things that the people of the day were reading. The heir apparent, Prince of Wales, look at him, very handsome fellow there. So you've got all sorts of stuff. Newspapers from the time are one of my favourite resources. So if you're going back to about, I don't know, you can probably get these back as far as 1850, something like that, 1860. Newspapers, illustrated magazines, very useful resource. Another thing that I use, just ignore the tractor, it will eventually go away, is picture books. Now, secondhand books, I'm lucky enough to live within reach of Hay-on-Wye, which is the secondhand book capital of the world. Great day out, brilliant for getting research. You can pick up secondhand books really, really cheaply. I'm a poor traveller, I don't go far, I just about make it to Hay-on-Wye. All my Gretel books are set in Bavaria. I'd love to go, maybe I'll get there one day, but I doubt it. But picture books, I mean, I think research feels very academic, and you feel like you need to have books that are quite intellectual, quite highbrow to give you proper research. Well, actually, anything like travel books and picture books are brilliant for just giving you a feel of the place. If you've never been there, what better than some fantastic coloured pictures of the place that you are thinking of? I'm going to try and find you a decent one. Okay, so, you know, your chateau, your schloss, your castles, they're all here, and they can be got for, you know, £3.50 at your second-hand bookshop. And when you're a bit stuck, when you're writing and you're trying to picture something and it's not coming through, or you just need a little bit of spark of inspiration, one of these, it's great. Great, terrific. Of course, you will also read the more detailed accounts of things. When I was writing The Witch's Daughter, and I needed to know about the witch trials in 17th century England, I found this book, Witchfinders, there we go, a 17th century English tragedy by Malcolm Gaskill. Brilliant little book. You know, no pictures, well, there are a few pictures, not many, but the information in there is fabulous, and it's a really easy read, even though it's not dry. You know, research reading doesn't have to be dry and dusty. It's really good. The other thing I'd recommend is books like this. Little sort of books that you might even find not in bookshops. This one was actually a present from a friend, and a book of old-fashioned superstitions, black cats and evil eyes. Just a little browsy sort of book that you can dip into. And it's sometimes it just triggers something. It just gives you little ideas. Lighted candles and evil spirits, little tiny chapters you can read just one when you're waiting for something. Friday the 13th, why is it unlucky? All sorts of odd little things like that can help give you extra points for your plots. So those sort of books I recommend. And of course, if you're researching something that somebody does, not just in the past but in the present as well, and you need to work that into your story, you're going to need books on those crafts and talents, and this one is Spellcraft for Hedge Witches, and I have a soft spot for this one by Ray Beth. Very good, I highly recommend that. It was one of the first books I bought when I was researching magic, and then of course I went on to write 5 books about witches, so it became really useful. Even though I had different types of magic in different books, this one was really helpful. So okay, resources, obviously you're going to have books, films, watching films in the name of research. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. I highly recommend that. Be a little bit wary of relying on the way people speak in films. Every screenwriter will have their own take on how to make arcane and archaic speech patterns palatable to the modern ear, if something can be palatable to an ear, it's not necessarily authentic. The language they use is the language of that writer, not necessarily how it originally was. So be a bit wary of that, but they're great for just getting a feel for the time, and very good for costumes usually as well. Obviously visits to libraries, visits to museums. Go to museums or historic buildings that allow you, if at all possible, to handle the artefacts, to touch things, to try on some of the clothes. And we're coming back to that picture of two women in the same bed, which we'll come to a bit later. There are some places that encourage it more than others. Avebury Manor is one in Wiltshire that I've been using for my new series, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later on. Okay. The internet is a good resource for your research, but you could use it to exhaustion. Depending on the time, if you're writing Victorian England, for instance, I don't know, you'll be lost in there on that internet looking at Victorian stuff forever. Be careful, give yourself a time limit or something. You'll find that after a while you're just finding the same information over and over again on different sites, and it's really time consuming and you just get bogged down with it. And if you do that too much, you'll get bored with it as well, and when you're bored with your subject, you're not going to write about it in a very interesting way, so beware of that. Travel itself. If you are a good traveller and you can go to the places, obviously, if you go to Wiltshire, for instance, it's not going to be the same as it was in 1605 when your book might be set, if it's my book, but there will be things there that you can take from it that are of the time that you're talking about, if that's where you're setting it. So travel, if you can do it, to the places where you're writing about and where your book is set, can be helpful. Antique shops. Antique shops are good. Obviously for me, because my new series is set in an antique shop, but antique shops are brilliant for giving you really stimulating objects and ideas of what was fashionable, what people liked, what things cost, because if you talk to the people in the antique shops about the history of the antiques, they're usually pretty happy to share their knowledge with you, and it's better than just sitting there reading a book all the time, so it gets you out of the house. Just try not to buy too many of the antiques, or you'll be in a minus equation before you even sell a book. So yeah, sources, films. The other source that people overlook is talking to people. You know, we are of a generation where people older than us can remember things. They can remember things their grandmothers maybe talked to them about, and that's going back to the beginning of the 20th century maybe, and that can give you some huge insights, because if they can remember things that they've heard directly from their grandparents, and those grandparents were remembering things that their grandparents told them, we're back to Queen Victoria's time. You can get back quite a long way, so don't forget to use people as a resource when you're researching. So what is my secret for doing research? How do I go about it, and what do I think is the easiest way for you to do it effectively? Well, here's the thing. Don't call it research. The only time you ever refer to what you're doing as research is if you're talking to your family and if you're talking to your accountant, because your family will tolerate you going away on a research trip, okay? It's work. It's all going towards making a living and doing what you do, so that's fine. Your accountant will be very pleased to hear that you did something in the name of research, because it will be tax deductible and you can put it in your little bookkeeping entries and you can set it against tax. So for your accountant, for your family, you're doing research, but for you, you're not doing research. Research is dry and dusty and academic and hard going, and it's serious business. You're doing time travel. You're doing the thing that is what you want to give your readers in those historical works of fiction that you're going to create. I think of it as time travel. When I come in here in my little shed and I'm writing historical fiction, this is my time travel machine. And the difference is that your approach to the research, if you think of it in this way, is much more creative, I believe, is how I look at it. Research, and I've done a degree and a master's degree. I have done proper research for things. I know how it works and I know how to do it. It's not that I don't think it's valuable. I just think if you're doing it for fiction and for creating a world of your own in that historical time, you need to be more creative. So I think of myself back in that time, and when I'm whether it's reading a book, looking at some material from the time, going to a place where something happened in the time that I'm setting my book. However I'm doing it, I am imagining myself in that time, and I'm trying to think what it would feel like, and feelings are really important here. We've talked about using your senses as a writer. Guess what? I've got a video on that. I will link it down in the comments below. But it's about how you would experience that time travel. So maybe some aspect of it would really resonate with you. It could be to do with how long it took to get everywhere. People didn't go far. When I wrote the book, The Winter Witch, it really made me think about how people often live their lives within the horizons that they could see in any direction. They might never go any further because it took a long time to travel places. And if in your story someone has to travel a long distance, that becomes quite a mission in itself, and you might find that really interesting, and it might really spark in you the idea of having that experience. And when you write about that and you're thinking about how it felt to be bruised and jostled and jolted in those carriages, how the carriages would have been stuck in the mud, and your journey might have suddenly not just slowed down because of the rain, it might have stopped for a week. That repairing those carriages wasn't a matter of calling out the RAC. That could have taken days. Maybe you were in a real hurry, maybe somebody was ill, maybe there was something urgent. What would that have made you feel like? How difficult would that travel have been? It could be that you found considering the whole aspect of what you were going to wear in a bygone time was really difficult. How did that restrict your movement? As a woman, you were in a corset. Women weren't feeble and fainting because they were delicate wee creatures in days gone by. They were fainting because they couldn't breathe, because they were in these darn corsets, and if anything shocking or exciting or difficult, or they had to exert themselves, something like that happened, they could not get in enough air to sustain them, and that's why they used to keep fainting. So if you thought about that in your time travel research, if you really put yourself in that situation, when you come to write about it, it will show through in your writing, and you will send your viewers on that time travel, your readers on that journey of time travel too. And that is what you're trying to do. And the more you can tell yourself that you are not researching, you are time traveling back to that era and you are experiencing it, the more you will get that into your story and across to your reader, and the easier it will be for them to experience that too. And that's what you want to do. And when I get reviews for my book saying that people felt they were there, they were taken back to that time and that place, I feel I've done my job. And I know it's because of the way I research my books. And I'm not an expert, I'm not a historian, but I do like to do a bit of time travel. And I know now you're all waiting for that picture of two women in the same bed. And it was done in the name of research, and it was all very innocent. And it was at Avebury Manor, which I think I've talked about before, in Wiltshire, me and my trusty research assistant Mel. And they encourage you in this house to try out the furniture, to try on the clothes, to see what it felt like to live in those times. So that's coming up now. Once you've enjoyed that, perhaps you will have a look at those other videos I've suggested, because there are more ones about research, there are more ones about how to use your senses as a writer to engage your readers. So good luck with that, good luck with your writing, and happy reading.